Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. So today we're going to be looking at the 2018 Senate elections. 30 days away from the 2018 midterm elections. This is going very fast, but after Kavanaugh's confirmation. So this is the current composition of the United States Senate, with the Democrats holding 49 seats, caucusing with 2 independents caucusing with them, of course, with a total of 49, and the Republicans at 51. So the states solidly Republican are states that currently have 2 Republican senators. The states that are solidly Democratic, which are blue, have 2 Democratic senators, and the states that are currently sort of a purplish red-blue shade are states that have 1 Democrat and 1 Republican senator. So this is the current map. Right now we have 35 contested races, 10 of which have Democrats that Donald Trump won in these states back in 2016. States like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Indiana, Florida, Missouri, and the list continues. There, of course, are safe states for both political parties, and the Republicans always start out with an advantage looking at this map every 6 years. Considering that many Democrats come from Republican states, again, 10 states that went to Trump in 2016, looks very bad for them if they are going to go on into 2018. Possibly lower than they were and lower than they are standing today. So after Kavanaugh's confirmation, he was confirmed 50-48, which would have been 51-49 if it wasn't for Murkowski from Alaska and Daines from, I believe, Montana. And overall, that would have just evened out our numbers 51-49 with no need for Vice President Mike Pence. So let's go ahead and fill in all the safe states, and then we'll come back to the more contested races, and there are a bunch of them. So from the western coast to Washington, California, Hawaii, of course, Democratic state, Washington, a Democratic state, and then California having no Republican on the ballot, going all the way up to the north. Really don't expect much for Republicans here. We can move New Jersey just for now in the toss-up column because it's not rated as safe. Minnesota, surprisingly a safe state, but also once you look at the approval ratings, not so much surprising right after that. Utah, Wyoming, Nebraska. Actually, Nebraska is not necessarily safe at this point, but obviously we'll still land in the GOP column. Mississippi overall going into the GOP column. So that puts the Democrats at 35 seats. The Republicans now have 45. And we can go ahead and move into the likely Democratic seats, although there aren't that many, to be completely honest with you. In terms of how Democrats are doing, most of the races that will keep them within possibly winning the majority in 2020 or putting them even at play in terms of Senate bills and confirmations in the future, they really are going to be within the leaning and tilt Democratic column. So let's start off with the likely Democratic seats. States like New Mexico and Virginia and New Jersey now, after new data has come out, moving it from +2 only to +11. Obviously a big improvement for Bob Menendez there. Across the entire Rust Belt, including Minnesota's special election, those states are now in the likely column. Now here are 2 states that may surprise you being moved into the likely column: West Virginia and Ohio. So this is after Kavanaugh's confirmation, which was yesterday, and the reason why West Virginia has moved from leaning Democratic to likely Democratic is because he was the only Democrat to vote for confirming Brett Kavanaugh. The whole argument in a number of these Democratic states were that these people cannot cross partisan lines and go over to the other side and say, yes, I will vote for you. Joe Manchin went with the majority, sure, but he also voted in favor of a conservative Supreme Court justice. If that says anything, it says bipartisanship, mainly because he was able to vote for a conservative in the Supreme Court, whereas typically other Democrats, every other Democrat, every other one of them, all 48 except for him, all 49 of them except for him, voted against Brett Kavanaugh. So that definitely says something, especially since some of these senators are more likely to lose than him. It definitely says a lot. So his race has now moved from leaning Democratic into the likely column. I remember there's a poll taken before Kavanaugh's confirmation saying if Joe Manchin supports him, he wins by 18%. Supports Kavanaugh, and referring to him, Joe Manchin wins by 18%. If he votes against Kavanaugh, he still wins, but only by 2%. So pretty much Joe Manchin has just solidified his re-election bid at this point and probably have wasted a lot of GOP money there, but their prizes aren't necessarily just spent on states like West Virginia. That puts the Democrats at 44 seats and the Republicans at 45. In Ohio, Sherrod Brown is just polling very well in double digits. This race could possibly even move to the safe Democratic column by the end of 2018. Who really knows at this point? That pretty much covers all of our likely Democratic states. Now we can move over into the likely GOP states. States like Nebraska and the Mississippi special election both move into the likely column for the Republican Party. Nebraska, typically characterized as a safe Republican state, actually could be well within a less than 15% margin. Now, obviously that's a blowout in terms of a swing state, but this is the state of Nebraska. This is a pretty Republican state, one of the most red parts of the red wall. The only time it's ever been a little bit of blue was when the 2nd District went for Obama in 2008 in the presidential election, but other than that, holds a Republican representative in all 3 of its districts, 2 Republican senators, Not much different than the other stereotypical Republican states. So, 47 Republicans and 44 Democrats. Where can the Democrats gain their numbers? Well, first of all, we can start by moving into the leaning Democratic states. States like Montana at this point, even with I forgot his name, John Tester. Sorry, I forgot his name for just a second. John Tester not voting in favor of Brett Kavanaugh. Every other Democrat hasn't. So if they're all taking the risk, they clearly do think that they can win without voting in favor of Brett Kavanaugh, because every move from this point on is going to be with the re-election. Kavanaugh was the final thing that they actually did care about, and that's actually going to be put on the national stage, and now they're all off to the re-election bids. With a month left, all of these senators are going back home and campaigning very hard, especially with all these October surprises expected to come out. These Democrats are probably going to be the most vulnerable because they are the incumbents. There aren't really that many surprises outside of nationwide candidates of those who are not currently in power. For example, you look over to North Dakota. Yes, Kevin Cramer's probably suspect to possibly an October surprise, but Heidi Heitkamp is that incumbent up for re-election that people are going to be looking for a lot more than they would for an opposition party's candidate. Or if we go over to the state of, let's say, Florida, Rick Scott, yes, he's the incumbent governor, so there should be data about him there, but Bill Nelson is the one going for the re-election bid. So if people think that it's time for a turnover, but they don't know if they want a Republican yet, it could sway them into the favor of voting for one if there was an October surprise against Bill Nelson. So a bunch of these incumbents are now at risk for things that they've done in the past to come up, as did with Brett Kavanaugh, as did with Donald Trump, as did with Hillary Clinton back in 2016. Many candidates lose their race within the final 30 days. Again, this is the Democratic Party's race to lose. This is a GOP-held Senate, but these races are currently mainly held by the Democrats. Keep in mind the Republicans are only, at this point, defending 9 seats. Okay, the Democrats are defending a lot more. They currently have 23 seats that are safe, and the Republicans have 42. So the Democrats, obviously, with a lot more contested there, that could be fault on their part. I mean, they wouldn't need to worry about states like Montana and North Dakota if they were able to win in Indiana and Florida in 2016, but they weren't able to. So they do need to worry about these states. Their failure to take back Congress in 2016 or even tie it definitely did hurt them, because they weren't able to pick up a Senate seat in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, both of which were expected to go to them back in 2016. I remember seeing it on 538 every single day. Those races were rated Democratic. Well, they went to the GOP at the end of the day. So with 8 contested races left, we still have a couple of races to move into the leaning Democratic column. States like Arizona have now moved from tilt Democratic to lean Democratic, and Flake has voted in favor of Kavanaugh, but that's not really going to help the GOP candidate. He's not an incumbent. Well, sorry, let me rephrase that. He is the incumbent, but he's not the incumbent going for re-election. Yes, he is. He was running for re-election, but this vote probably isn't going to boost the GOP candidate whatsoever. Kyrsten Sinema wasn't in power. She's not the incumbent. It's not going to drive up Republicans to vote against who? Jeff Flake, the Republican. So think about it. When it comes down to these Republican states, excitement probably isn't that high. They're probably not going to be as pressed about these type of elections as they would be in states like Florida or North Dakota, where they have a pretty solid Republican base. Florida I mentioned because Trump currently has a positive approval rating here, where he doesn't in Iowa or Ohio, which he almost won by double digits, compared to Florida, which was in less than 5%. So enough talking about that. We can go ahead and look at the states that are currently in the leaning GOP column. So a new poll from Texas came out today, shows Ted Cruz leading plus 6%. So that's pretty much expected. At this point, leading into the election season, with many people saying that Republican turnout is up, I'm not going to put that argument on Texas. Okay, the only reason why I would see Texas going plus 6 for Ted Cruz, that's pretty good for the Democrats. I mean, looking at that number, it's kind of expected. Okay, leading into the general election, 2 weeks before the election, Texas was a toss-up state for 2016. Then it went into the leaning column, then the likely column, and then went to Trump by 9% on election day. It went from a plus 3 Trump lead to a plus 13 Trump lead at the end of the 2016 election. So if let's say that Trump underperformed by 4%, which he did according to the polls compared to the final results, well, you go over and then you take 4 away from Ted Cruz, he still wins by 2%. So these numbers aren't necessarily the worst for Democrats. They could be doing better. But at this point in time, I do think Ted Cruz could narrowly win this race over 1%, but not higher than 5%. In terms of states like Missouri, North Dakota, and Florida, these are 3 states where currently these Democratic senators did not vote for Brett Kavanaugh. That's huge. Florida probably not going to have the biggest impact, but North Dakota and Missouri are probably going to have a harsher impact on these Democratic senators. So for right now, North Dakota, I'm going to keep in the leaning Republican column, and that's being generous, very generous. At this point, I could see the argument as to why it would go into the likely GOP column, but I think this one could cap off at 5% at this point, with Heidi Heitkamp not voting in favor of Brett Kavanaugh before new polling comes out. Keep in mind, Kevin Cramer is leading by 10%, 12%, Can you imagine the outrage after they find out, which they already did, that she did not vote in favor of Brett Kavanaugh, even though it was pretty much set in stone that he's going to be confirmed? This was just a morality vote, which means that her policies are probably not going to fit the agenda of the North Dakota voters that currently approve of the president, have a Republican governor, have a Republican representative, have another Republican senator, and they likely could have another one at the end of 2018, which is why I'm putting this one in the lean GOP column, the first pickup for the GOP in 2018. As for states like Indiana, that one I think could go from leaning to tilt. States like those are going to get very close after this vote. States like Missouri are going to move into the tilt column in favor of the Democratic Party. At this point, Marsha Blackburn has consistently led in all of these polls. I don't think Kavanaugh is going to help her, but I do think that the Republican Party will retain the majority in the United States Senate. With the state of Tennessee coming out with a lot more information about this race, it seems like Phil Bredesen is just getting worse and worse in terms of polling numbers. He may be doing better in terms of campaigning, but this may not have been his year. It could have been if they capitalize on it right, and a number of these senators, it probably wouldn't affect Tennessee as much as other states. But right now, Democrats aren't being viewed favorably. Neither are Republicans, but this is a Republican state, so you can bet that Democrats are not being viewed as favorable in a state like Tennessee as they would be in a state like Virginia or my home state of Maryland. So when you take a state like Maryland, compare that to Tennessee. Think about it like Larry Hogan ran for Senate in my state. Yes, it would get close, but you probably would expect it would end up in the leaning Democratic column. Same logic can be applied just vice versa in states like Tennessee, a solidly GOP state in presidential elections, willing to flip, but also may not, and just go narrowly in the favor of the incumbent party, which definitely helps the GOP at this point, keeping them in the majority, which means that they currently only need Vice President Mike Pence's tie vote to give them the majority, but they probably aren't done here. In states like Florida, I think that Bill Nelson can narrowly edge over this line with a lean, which means that he would win by around 1 to 2%, just not less than 1%. Yes, he did not vote in favor of Brett Kavanaugh, but keep in mind the composition in terms of voting bases in states like Florida are probably like 40, 30, 20, okay, with the Democrats at 30, independents at 40, and then Republicans at 20, which doesn't add up to 100, but you pretty much get it. So I guess you could say 30 Republicans, but there are just a little bit more Democrats that you might expect in terms of the voting base. A number of independents, which typically sway in favor of the conservatives, whichever party they may be, because we see states like West Virginia now likely Democratic because they voted in favor of Brett Kavanaugh. But for right now, Florida moves into the leaning Democratic column. And states like Nevada are probably going to go into the leaning Democratic column. Keep in mind, Nevada is a Democratic state. So for him to vote in favor of Kavanaugh may in fact hurt him compared to other GOP candidates or incumbents that are running in a number of other races. This vote in favor of Brett Kavanaugh is going to help them. So when we look at states like Texas, it could help, but not so much in terms of hurting the Democrats, more of just helping Ted Cruz say that he's just sticking with his conservative agenda, which everyone already knows. So states like Texas may not be the best example, but let's take a state like North Dakota, where Heidi Heitkamp did not vote in favor of Brett Kavanaugh, which is probably going to kill off her campaign. With 30 days left in the election season, it's going to be very hard to see this map change much. And to be completely honest with you, this map probably isn't going to change more than 1 to 2 seats by the end of 2018. So these videos are going to come weekly, and this is actually my a weekly video, I guess, which is coming out on a Sunday, but I didn't want to title it a Sunday because it's right after Kavanaugh's confirmation. That's a lot more relevant, and that's a lot more in the discussion than it would be in another video before. So for right now, this is the second week update in the state. No, not the state of October, the month of October for the 2018 Senate election. So it finishes off our map with 50 Republicans and 50 Democrats. Now this map does benefit the Democrats because they are gaining 1 seat, but they're also losing 1 in a state like North Dakota. So when it comes down to it, they're not gaining seats in states like Tennessee or Texas. However, I'm not saying it's impossible, but right now their major base they should be focusing on is the Rust Belt, solidifying Florida and Montana, and putting all their hopes in states like Nevada and Arizona. Because right now, we look at those 2 states; those are the 2 most vulnerable Republican states at this point in time. So our final map is at 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans. Again, I'm going to see a number of comments talking about Kavanaugh's confirmation, how this is going to help the GOP. But look at the individual states. Kavanaugh being confirmed probably isn't going to help the GOP in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. And when we look at other states, probably not in Texas, because yes, Ted Cruz is already a conservative. That's not anything different. The only states where I think that it could get closer are states like Indiana, Florida, Missouri, North Dakota, and Montana. But overall, I think those states could actually go towards the Democrats, and of course, West Virginia being more solidified in favor of the Democrats because of the fact that Manchin did vote in favor of Kavanaugh. So thank you guys for watching this video. Comment down suggestions below, and I'll see you all tomorrow.